The following review is intended for entertainment purposes and targeted for adult fans of the series.
I hate it when a take just slowly collapses. I screwed up and I'm like, that's okay, it wasn't that bad of a screw up. I'm gonna keep going and then Hello there, heroes. I'm the Orange Ranger, and welcome to another Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters from Beverly Hills Double Bill review. A special hello to those of you who might be tuning into these reviews after having seen my previous double bill leading off the Viewing Globe's bonus day of content. I saw a number of people in that chat room reminiscing about what a weird little show this was. 2 more episodes to get to, so there's no time to waste. Let's take a look at the 37th episode of TTAF, Take 2 Galactic Sentinels and Call Nimbar in the Morning. Please make sure you're subscribed to my channel to see all of my videos. Ring that bell, get your notifications set up so you're notified of whenever I post brand new videos, such as these Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters from Beverly Hills episode reviews. And if you'd like to lend any financial support to my channel, please consider checking me out on Patreon or Ko-fi at Orange Ranger Videos. I'll go ahead and mention this now since it's given away by the episode's preview, and I mentioned it in the teaser last week. Isolus is going to be the monster for this episode, and I had actually been thinking that it had been a while since we'd seen this monster. It occurred to me when Nimbar mentioned that Isolus appeared in Paris off-screen during Emperor for a Day. It'll be nice to see her again. Or should I say, ice to see her again?
That was not funny.
Oh, heroes. I have called this show out for some dumb, lazy, goofy mistakes. But this has to be one of the worst. Note to any future TV producers in my audience, when you are displaying the title of the episode on screen, it might just behoove you to ensure that that title is spelled properly. In case you haven't noticed, they spelled Sentinels with an A at the end. Sentinels is spelled with an E at the end.
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Okay, really quick music note. I'm trying to get all the minutia out of the way early on. We get that 4-note title theme again, but right after it, they play another 5-note kind of evil trumpet theme. Anyway, the evil trumpets, of course, mean that we're starting off on Molecula, where Isolus is kind of just waving her sword around. Gorganis wonders how something so lovely can also be so deadly. And it's actually Lechner that does the explaining for once. She's been upgraded, blah, blah, blah. I swear I'm trying to work through these tiny notes and minutia, but Gorganis said 2 really weird things back to back. If it had been just 1, I probably would have ignored it, but 2, I feel the need to mention. First of all, Gorganis says Isolus now has the power to make the summer freeze and the winter sizzle. Why do both? Doing one would mess the planet up, but doing both is just a reversal of the seasons, which actually later in the episode he says is the intended goal. But that really wouldn't be that big of a deal. In fact, that's how the weather actually is down in the southern hemisphere. Then he tells her to wreck that blue and white ball called Earth. Earth is a blue and green ball. She's trying to make it a blue and white ball, but that's not what he said, now is it?
Get on with it!
Too true, MPG. Too true. Turns out there's a heat wave going on in Beverly Hills, and it's so bad that the AC at the cafe is on the fritz. Sam isn't around because Sam only shows up in alternate realities, so Swinton is working on the AC. Gordon is sitting on the couch, coughing and sneezing and very clearly sick. He decides to go home, asking Drew to tell Lori why he didn't hand out a pile of flyers that Lori wanted him to hand out. Drew suggests a home remedy, but Gordon instead reveals basically an entire pharmacy worth of prescription medication. After a joke about owning stock in pharmaceutical companies that I called a mile away, but still thought was pretty funny, Lori comes in annoyed. Apparently Gordon keeps pulling this trick, begging out of helping her with stuff like this because of physical ailments. Then they all feel a chilly breeze. Drew congratulates Swinton on fixing the AC, but of course, he hasn't managed to fix it yet. Then their tattoos flash, and though Gordon tries to beg out of this as well, Drew drags him through the portal. Nimbar tells them about Isolus, in fine detail actually, exactly how she's been upgraded, and how they're going to need to focus their fire directly at the upgrade. I know this show far too well by now. They're going to form Nitron and zap her directly in the chest, because that's what they always do. Apparently this episode needed a little more padding though. Gordon tries to beg out once again, telling Nimbar that he's sick, and Nimbar takes a moment to look up what sick means, and then gives them the corresponding Nimian term, Spleepdil. Nimbar suggests his own galactic homemade remedy, but says that one of the ingredients is very hard to find, so for now, Gordon can chew on some cinnamon. I don't know what that's supposed to be. Anyway, Lori once again gets in his face about him just needing to suck it up and do his job, and he finally agrees. But when it's his turn to call out Taurus, he sneezes. Taurus sneezes, showing that he's still sick even while transformed. Isolus shows up and they blast back and forth at each other for a bit. We get this weird, interesting close-up on Scorpio's face as she calls for them to form Nitron, but it doesn't work. And this is actually consistent with the previous episode, when Lori had the regression virus and they couldn't form Nitron. So, what is their next strategic move in this battle of wills? They retreat. I swear, this team runs away more than any team of superheroes I've ever seen. It's like the meta idea that they always beat monsters inside of 2 minutes infiltrates the canon. Hey, Sentinels, there's a monster out there, but I don't think you're going to be able to beat this one in 2 minutes. What are you going to do?
Run away! Run away! Run away!
Back in the cave, Gordon is feeling even more run down, sitting down on his platform. What's more, Drew is now feeling sick, joining him in sitting down. Even Nimbar is impacted, and eventually, he cannot communicate clearly with the team. However, Isolus is, still out there. So Lori and Swinton decide to head back out to fight. And they manage to head off my criticism of what Nitron needs to do to defeat Isolus by pointing out that the upgrade is located in Isolus's chest plate. So they do need to shoot her in the chest. How convenient. No, actually, how convenient. Gordon volunteers to go as well. He's chewed on some of the tree bark, as they call it, and is feeling a little bit better. Drew, of course, isn't going to be left in the cave by herself, so she goes as well. Though she does get her own transforming gag. On her turn, she goes, Centaur. Isolus is gone at first, so the team calls to be portaled back. But each time that Nimbar tries, he sneezes and displaces the portal. Finally, Isolus shows up and dodges all of their zappies. They finally fight her off enough to manage to portal back. Back in the cave, there's a really bad smell, and the Sentinels realize that not only has Nimbar caught their cold, it turns out he's deathly ill because of it. Now yellow-green and moaning and obviously stinky. As they debate what they can do now, Gordon is pacing the cave wildly, and the Sentinels realize he's better. The bark worked. Predictably, or at least according to them, predictably, he didn't eat it all because it tasted bad, so they find a leftover piece of it and give it to Nimbar, who manages to absorb it. Where has this humor been all season long? On Molecula, Gorganis admires Isolus, and Lechner makes a comment as well. Gorganis chides Lechner, telling him to show some respect. Lechner apologizes, saying he must have just lost his head. Gorganis says, "Not yet. But the night is young." And suddenly this episode takes a really nice, sweet turn. As the Sentinels wonder what to do next, Nimbar barely manages to speak, asking for more of the tree bark. Of course, it is the bark of a tree that grows on Earth, conveniently enough, the shaggy bark elm tree. Looked it up, doesn't seem to exist. The closest thing I found was the shagbark hickory, which is a walnut tree. Anyway, coincidence upon coincidence, the easiest place on Earth to find that tree is the forest that Isolus just kicked them out of. Gordon says they should just open a portal themselves, but Swinton says they can't. They don't really make it clear why they can't. It's something about the controls and instability, and Nimbar being the controlling influence. The portal could collapse if they try to open it themselves. Nimbar manages to say that he will try to open a portal, however, he may not be strong enough to get them back. Therefore, this should be a single Sentinel mission, and he asks who will go. Swinton sneezes, Drew coughs, and even Lori seems to be pretty run down, so Gordon says that he'll go. He is the healthiest of the four, and besides, sometimes you just have to go do your job. Of course, Isolus is standing right in front of the tree they need. Furthermore, of course, Taurus manages to get behind Isolus, but keeps on fighting her instead of going for the tree. He does eventually go for the tree. She sees this and zaps it, knocking some cinnamon sticks off of it. No, I'm serious. I made this joke before, but it's very clear that they just set some cinnamon sticks down by this tree prop. He grabs a handful of them and portals back. This show seems to handle the whole size-changing thing the Sentinels do by absolutely ignoring it. When we consider the size of Taurus compared to, say, an office building, like when they're on the city set, you would figure those pieces of bark that he grabs should be at least the size of, let's say, a car? But of course, when they get back to the cave, they're shrunken down in proportion to him and they're small again. Does this mean they're now more potent because of that?
Who knows? Not me. Who cares? Ditto mark.
Gordon wants to save a little of the bark and market it as a cure for the common cold. The others tell him that he knows he can't do that, and that might carry a little more weight if this was not the bark of a tree that is found on Earth. You don't even have to use a portal, just go get some of it later. The other Sentinels take some of the bark and they give all the rest to Nimbar and everyone gets better. Of course, the cold was not the primary antagonist of the episode, and we do have a Nitron fight that we need to get to. So Nimbar detects that the Earth's temperatures are falling, and the team heads out for what is, if we count Gordon's solo fight, the 4th time this episode. I had a feeling this was coming based on the pace of the episode, but the entire Nitron fight lasts 13 seconds. Both shields get knocked away, zap, zap, zap.
That was a great scene.
In the cave, Gordon did try to still save a little of the bark for his cure-all, but Nimbar says that the bark only works as a cure in his immediate vicinity. I call BS. I think he just doesn't want to have an undue influence on the Earth's economy or something. Back at the cafe, Gordon and Swinton, the latter less enthusiastically, work on a way to try to get the bark to work as a cure away from Nimbar. Drew walks up to Gordon and says that Lori has gone home sick, giving him the flyers that she was passing out, saying that he would understand. He gives the flyers to the other two, saying that his doctor told him to take it easy. They toss the flyers to the side, not at all interested in helping out. Signs now! Episode 37. Take 2 Galactic Sentinels and call Nimbar in the morning. Pros: clever to have the common cold as a primary villain, nice character piece for Gordon, and good teamwork. Cons: too much padding, Gorganis was barely involved, and criminally short Nitron fight. Could have been better, but better than it could have been. Long episode title gets 3.5 signs out of 5. Let's take a peek at the next episode up, the 38th episode, The Psychiatrist. Dude! dude, when Drew is forced to see a psychiatrist that wants to institutionalize her, the Sentinels are at risk of being discovered. Also, Emperor Gorganis installs a memory-enhancing chip into Snake Trooper.
What is your name again?
Let's take a look at the 38th episode of TTAF, The Psychiatrist. Okay, right off the bat, there's something weird that I have to mention. And no, it's not just that we're not starting on Molecula, and we're actually starting en medias res with a fight scene. It's actually that there's these weird bars in a line in the middle of the screen. Here, take a look at full size. It's just weird. It seems to go away after the first fight scene. I don't know what it is. The Sentinels are fighting. Okay, that's actually something else that I have to mention. How about this? We are 37 episodes into this show. Only 3 episodes left to go. And we're getting a brand new monster, Snake Trooper. We'll talk more about that when we get to Gorganis. The Sentinels celebrate their win back in the cave and talk a bit about how tough it's getting to make believable excuses to their families about where they're slipping out to. Well, except for Drew, who says that Aunt Nicole always buys her excuses hook, line, and sinker. Alrighty, now we're on Molecula, now we're with Gorganis, so now I can talk about this monster. You're telling me 3 episodes to the end, when we're clearly just rushing to throw together some kind of new monster, this is how awesome the result is? I mean, from the neck down, okay, sure, it's just a humanoid suit, but look at this thing's head. This is a Star Trek-esque quality human snake head, and it has a robotic tank tread as its center head crest.
That was totally wicked!
Gorganis has this weird tendency to take a word or a phrase out of something Lechner said and take completely different inspiration from that. Lechner suggests sending Snake Trooper to a prison planet, and there it'll learn not to lose. From that, Gorganis took the word learn. Snake Trooper can be upgraded to learn the Galactic Sentinels' attacks. I loved this part. Lechner goes, "Can you do that?" Gorganis very calmly and flatly goes, "I'm Emperor Gorganis. I can do anything."
I can be anything.
What follows is exactly the scene you would expect after hearing Drew say that she's had no problems making excuses to Nicole. Drew's portal appears right in front of Nicole, but thankfully she was tanning with her eyes covered. Drew makes excuses about having been in the garden, and I saw you, but you didn't see me, etc., etc. Nicole says that the two need to have a heart-to-heart, just a chance for Drew to talk about anything that might be on her mind. Drew says that would be nice, but right now she's got to go to the cafe. She took a shift from a friend of hers. At the school, Drew mentions that she made up the story about the friend and switching shifts, but if they're at school, aren't they going to school? The show's really weird about that sometimes. Drew asks Gordon about any close calls portaling and tells him what Nicole said. He reassures her that it's probably fine, and they leave. But then we see an older man watching Drew as she leaves, and he takes down some notes. Of course, Drew is not an idiot. At the cafe, where the man is sitting and still watching her, Drew tells Lori that this guy has been following her and watching her all day long. Lori's not too worried about it. He seems too old to have any romantic interest. He's probably just a fan of her poetry. Gordon walking up and saying the same thing. Then Nicole comes in and asks to speak to Drew. Swinton walks up and asks if anything is wrong. And Nicole says yes, there is, asking to speak to Drew alone. And this is where it hits the fan. No, Nicole has not been believing Drew's excuses. She has noticed all the weird absences and strange little stories. Drew again tries to claim she's just really busy between school and work, but Nicole thinks it's more serious than that. She thinks that Drew has compulsive liar syndrome. Did a quick Google on this one. Turns out this one is legit. Nicole had it herself for 6 months. Except that she didn't. As Drew points out, that was a character that she was playing. But regardless, she did have to research the condition for the role, and she wants Drew to talk to creepy older stalker guy, who is actually the psychiatrist.
Roll credits.
Then we're back to the school, and now I'm getting really confused. First of all, Drew was allowed to leave the cafe without talking to the psychiatrist. And second of all, if she had class, why was she at the cafe before she was at class, but she was at class before she was at the cafe, and just what is going on?
Space is warped and time is bendable.
Anyway, Drew feels completely trapped here. The doctor is going to ask her about the excuses that she's been making. If she lies, it's going to be proof that she's a compulsive liar. If she tells the truth, instead they're going to think that she's insane. Gorganis installs his learning chip into Snake Trooper.
That was a great scene.
Yes, I know I've used that one already, but it was for the previous episode. Nimbar has called the team and tells them about Snake Trooper's return. Gordon drops a rather meta line about Gorganis never sending a weaker monster, and says they'll just do what they did last time.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Back to the battlefield, back to these weird lines in the middle part of the screen. The Sentinels actually get beaten around for the first part of this fight. Nothing they try works. Eventually, they form Nitron, and even then, at first, Snake Trooper seems to have the upper hand. It occurred to me that in all of this time, in all the episodes of this show, I don't think Nitron has ever lost a fight. And that streak continues, as eventually Nitron wins through.
Disappointed!
In the cave, Drew is worried about her appointment, and when Nimbar learns about it, he warns her not to reveal her superhero identity. Gonna give you a warning, this next part gets a little bit weird. And yes, I mean even for this show. At Drew's house, Nicole and the doctor walk in since Drew didn't show up for her appointment. They sit down and the doc asks her why she was late, pulling out a pocket watch. That's right, Doc here, and no, to be honest, I do not care what his character's name is a hypnotist, and that just seems a little bit weird to me. This is yet another thing that I researched from this show, and it turns out that psychiatry's opinion on hypnotism is kind of split down the middle. It's just something I personally find a little bit squicky and almost immoral. It's one thing to put her on a lie detector and show her the obvious symptoms of her lying. It's another to hypnotize her and force her to tell the truth, especially in front of a family member who's sitting right there. Anyway, she starts spinning a really elaborate lie that basically boils down to a celebrity having a car accident, but then she gets hypnotized and indeed admits that she is a Galactic Sentinel. To her credit, Nicole actually seems to know what that is. She doesn't go, Galactic Sentinels, what are those? But she also believes Drew instantly. However, the psychiatrist does not, saying it is all a delusion. He says that he can cure Drew, but she's going to need to be institutionalized. Nicole signs the papers. The other Sentinels are waiting at the cafe, where Drew very quickly managed to call them and tell them to meet her there. While they wait, they piece together what Snake Trooper is doing, but in a very odd way. Gordon says that it's weird that they had to form Nitron in round 2 when they didn't in round 1. That happens in almost every single episode. Anyway, they figure out that Snake Trooper is memorizing their moves, and then Drew shows up. She tells them about them wanting to take her to a clinic in the desert, and they decide to use the same diversionary tactic that they used against the sorcerer. And I don't have a clue what they're talking about. Seriously, this may have been something that they did in one of the early episodes that I reviewed last year, but I don't specifically remember what they're talking about. Anyway, they realize that they have to get Drew away from Nicole and the doctor. So, Swinton pretends to be a fan of the doctor's, Lori gets Nicole's autograph for a fundraiser, and Gordon sneaks Drew out the door. Gorganis reprograms Snake Trooper to anticipate Nitron's moves. Okay, now I am going to reuse it for the second time in an episode review.
That was a great scene.
We head back to the school at night. Why? because Drew is living in the school now, in the bathroom. The others bring her a sandwich and they try to figure out what to do. Drew jokingly suggests crashing in Nimbar's cave, and Gordon says it might not be a bad idea. Drew dismisses that, but this just gives Gordon a chance to throw Drew's words back in her face about having her aunt fooled hook, line, and sinker. Swinton tells Gordon to knock it off, but for once, I think I'm on Gordon's side here. He was right. Then the psychiatrist finds them. He said he had a feeling that Drew would seek the comfort of the familiar, the setting of the school, and the company of her friends. They try to say that they're not Drew's friends, but apparently Nicole had told the doctor that this was a thing with them. He tells them that Drew is going to the clinic. So of course, that's when their tattoos flash. They try to tell the doctor that Drew needs to come with them, but he says no, Drew is going to the clinic, and then she's going to be physically restrained there. Alright, so how did Drew manage to get away from this clearly crazy doctor to help the other Sentinels form Nitron and finally defeat Snake Trooper? Heroes, let's read the signs. Episode 38, The Psychiatrist, Part 1. Prose tackles a real-life mental health issue, brings up a problem real superheroes would face, and an awesome monster. Cons, there's a sense of fakeness to The Psychiatrist, there's not a lot of action in this episode, and Nicole's too suddenly serious. This one is surprisingly deep, and there's more on the way. The Psychiatrist Part 1 gets 4 signs out of 5. Yes, heroes, I will admit to pulling a bit of a fast one on you here. I knew from the start that this was a 2-part episode, but I just figured that so few of you are actually familiar with this show that I would let you experience that surprise the same way people did when they watched the show originally. It is interesting this deep in the show's run to get its first 2-part episode, and while I'll talk more about this later, it could kind of be considered unofficially the show's finale. I hope they don't lock Drew up in a round rubber room with rats. I hate rats. They make me crazy. Crazy? I was crazy once. They locked me up in a round rubber room with rats. I hate rats. They make me crazy. Crazy? I was crazy once! Okay, actually I wasn't. In fact, I love rats. Anyway, let's take a peek at the 39th episode of TTAF, The Psychiatrist, Part 2. Dude! Dr. McWhat's-his-name discovers the truth about the Galactic Sentinels as Snake Trooper begins its next attack. So, just one more video to go, right?
Wrong, 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 wrong.
Here's a little scheduling note for you all. We've got the second half of a 2-parter, followed up by the show's finale. I feel like cramming those two together just takes too much away from each of them. I'd like a little more space to go into my thoughts on each in a single video. So next time is going to be just The Psychiatrist Part 2, and then we'll have the show's 40th and final episode. That is going to do it for another Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters from Beverly Hills episode review. 2 of them, as a matter of fact. Thank you so very much for watching. Now that the video's done, you can let me know what you thought of these episodes, as well as my review of them, down in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure you smack that thumbs up button and let me know that you enjoyed this video. Until next time, heroes, don't lock me up in a round rubber room, and may the power portals protect you. They make me crazy! He tells Isolus to make the winter freeze, which is what it already does. At the cafe, there's a heat wave going on. That's what I wrote, but that sounds weird. Apparently this episode needed a little more padding because Gordon tries to Back in the cave, the Sentinels realize there's a really bad smell, and they realize, and they head back out for what if we count the other Sentinels tell him that they know Gordon wants to save a little of the bark and market it as a cure for the Carmen Killed. In the cave, Gordon did still try to save a little of the bark for his Anyway, Drew feels completely trapped here. Yes, even for this show. Gordon says he finds it odd that they had to form Nitron in round 2 when normally they don't. Gorganis reprograms Snake Trooper to recognize and adapt to Nitron's fuck. They say. Now that these episodes are episodes,